The Crystal Charter, Daughter of the Red Seal. Chapter 21. Maebe had been left waiting in one of the colourful chambers leading to the throne room. The tiled floor was designed to hide charged crystals. She knew they monitored her movement around the room, so a castle steward would be alerted if she left. The stone walls gave way to huge alcoves, stuffed, too full of green plants. One held a larger-than-life portrait of a long-dead Elar, whose judgmental face and beady eyes bored into the residents of the room. Maebe sat away from the gaze emanating from the disturbing likeness. She had never been anxious about being in the palace before. Whenever she had visited, she had always been a welcomed guest of one of the princes or princess, attending a meal with her father, training with their weapons master, or studying in the castle library. She now felt as though she were being summoned to the throne room like a prisoner awaiting punishment. Bile rose in the back of her throat and she swallowed it down. The king just wants to make sure I'm doing my duty, she told herself. The door creaked open, and Maebe prepared to leave the painted stare of the long-dead king for the fierce stare of a king who, last time she saw him, she had offended by dismissing his proposal of marriage to his son. Instead, a familiar face, topped with lush brown curls stacked high onto her head, peered around the door and gave a look of exasperation. Gods beyond, they've been keeping you in here. I was looking all over for you. You should have come to my rooms. Did Lady Certainly not tell you that I wanted to see you? Princess Morgana announced as she walked in. The grin on her face fell like an apple to the floor as she took in Maebe's appearance. Tired eyes and black-sleeved gown. I'm so sorry about your father, Maebe. They told me what happened. She perched on the bench alongside her, shaking her vibrant skirt straight. Thank you for coming to the house. You must have brought half of the palace guards for it to be deemed safe, Maebe tried to joke. I know they haven't caught whoever did it yet, but I'm sure General Nyla will have her witches find them soon. You know how artificers get when they want to solve a puzzle. They won't leave it alone. She tried to comfort Maebe, but her eyes brimmed with tears again. Morgana placed a gentle arm on Maebe's shoulder. Not that his death is a puzzle. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it like that, she said, squeezing her and letting go. You have nothing to be sorry for, Maebe blubbed. I didn't know the witches were being used to hunt for murderers now. Yes, well, Father has been quite put out by the timing, and I think, he wants to help. Morgana grimaced and shrugged. Oh, that's nice, Maebe sniffled. She stifled the few tears that tried to escape down her cheeks and took a deep breath. Do you know what the king wants? Well, he's furious that your father was taken from us like that. And sad, I guess. She shrugged. Mostly he just wants to see for himself that you're back in the city and ready to go south next week. He doesn't care about the trading contacts. If you want to skip out on trading this year to shorten the trip, he won't mind. He just wants to know that you're making a full run down to Camulus to pick up the burden and do the blood offering. The princess smiled at Maebe, an encouragement to receive a smile back. Seriously, though, my father isn't even the ground yet, and he's making demands. Maebe groaned. He is the king, Maebe. Attempts at making her smile had ended. She was now playing her role as princess, not friend. It's not an argument I'd pick if I were you. Your family has made this journey for centuries, and you're the only one whose blood can be traded now. And your reward for serving your king is that you get to make your own fortune using the Red Seal contract. I'm not arguing, Maebe started. I know my job, but just let me be annoyed at my stupid loyal ancestors and their stupid short-sighted traditions, she pouted, trying to shake off the princess's intensity. Morgana let out a short laugh. Keep your head high. Just say yes, and let's spend the next few days sorting this terrible business out. By the time you're back from the south, we would have caught the bastard responsible, so you can spit in his face. With one last quick hug, the princess stood, straightening her long peacock skirt and waist cinch before she fluttered out the room with a too cheery smile. She knew it was kind that Morgana had visited to see if she was okay. Maebe wasn't at all popular in court. But she couldn't control the simmering anger that bubbled in her gut. Why is everybody going about their own blissful lives? This is hard, she sighed to the beady-eyed king. She stretched upwards and paced around the room, counting the time away until she was summoned. Morgana was lightly informing the king of everything they had talked about, so she would be presented soon enough. She knew she couldn't count on Morgana as a friend. She was a princess who put her duty first. Maybe it was time for her to do the same. An ancient map of Auradis, the North Continent divided into the Green Kingdom and the Northern Lands, caught her eye as she was pacing. An alluring piece, rich with history, hidden away in a waiting room. Maebe clicked her teeth. It showed Auradis before the gate connected the swamps of Green Kingdom to Maine. The wall hadn't yet been raised to lock out their magical neighbours in the northeast, and the whole of the Green Kingdom had an equal-sized wings, rather than the stunted east wing. Hundreds of years ago, the swamps hadn't existed. It was difficult to imagine. The witch wars had affected every country, but the Green Kingdom bore the most physical scars. The land had been ripped apart like a loaf of bread. Huge areas sacrificed to the horrifying Thryae. Humans, pawns in a war of magic wielders, had risen up against their lords by unleashing Thryae onto them. The insect race tore through witch and wizard, resulting in catastrophic magic-fueled terror. Once released, the Thryae spawned and multiplied, corrupting the earth in an unstoppable wave of death, humans included. In an attempt to sever the land from the bugs, a spell was attempted to rip the Green Kingdom to safety, abandoning the northern lands. Thryae thrived in warmer climates, so the opinion was held that anyone left trapped could retreat north into the mountains. Magic failed in separating the countries. The gods themselves were supposed to have blessed the first Elar with the power to rule using the era crystals. It had been written down in the history books as a gift for suffering under wizard rule for so long. Mined from the royal isle, with assistance from the artificers loyal to the throne, humans used the power to claim the Green Kingdom for their own, eventually making truces with the Artificer Guild and writing the Crystal Charter. The era crystals, no longer needed to protect against witches, were now used along the swamp border under orders from the king. And, after the Green Kingdom attempted to abandon the northern lands, the wall was built to separate the two ill-disposed countries, a prevention against another war. The Sumines had been chosen as a family that was unwavering in their loyalty to the human throne. The blood offering was a tradition that showed that a human king still had subjects willing to bleed for his right to rule. The burden, a gift to the human king from a magic country, to represent respect and to ask forgiveness for slaughtering humans. Lost in thought, Maebe hadn't noticed the young servant open the door and step into the room. "Excuse me, Miss Sumine. The king is ready to see you now, if you will." She raised a hand and gestured out into the corridor. The girl's navy livery was tucked into a wide belt, embroidered with the wings of the royal sigil. Of course, lead the way." Maebe brushed her clothes free of imaginary dirt. The black sleeves of mourning contrasted too harshly with the metallic stitches in her sleeveless jacket. But it was customary to change your clothing, parts of it into black, when you were in mourning. Maebe hated wearing black. It reminded her of her mother's death. They paced down one of the long corridors of the palace, grey stone carved into columns that arched overhead. Twisting vines crept from the outside and wrapped around the columns, in crystals that protected from the elements. Flashes of colour in the form of huge tapestries hung between every arch that lacked a window. tall, dark doors with 4 huge faceted crystals on either side loomed ahead. Mouse had told her the throne room had enchantments cast, so when you passed through, you were bound to obey the crystals or be expelled using magic from the room. The 4 crystals prevented anyone from harming the royal family, lying to their liege, from using raw magic, and from being a creature other than human or witch. Maebe had never felt anything from the doors. No sensation of cleansing, no twinge of magic, or a pulse of loyalty flooding through her, as some had claimed. They swung open, revealing the high ceilings and more tiled floors flooded with warm light. King Jasik was resting on his brass throne, hunks of natural gradient crystal jutting from the back, reaching upwards towards the high ceilings. Advisors crowded on either side. Prince Sewell was still in the palace, and his stern face mirrored the king's, boring into her from across the room. Starlings flapped about in the galleries among the spectators, twittering to one another. Most people who viewed the king's meetings from the galleries were waiting to watch those who tried to break the magics crafted into the door. The easiest to break was lying. Being levitated and flung backwards until the spell dumped them across the threshold was embarrassing, especially in front of a crowd. Maebe had watched it happen dozens of times over the years. It was considered more exciting if they knocked a guard down as they were thrown out. What surprised Maebe were the 2 visitors who stood out against the much-loved metallics and colourful crystals of the palace. Wrapped in furs and looking too warm were 2 heavily bearded men from the northern lands. Ocean blue eyes, filled with intrigue, stared at Maebe as she walked up the unending motley of tiles. In spite of her nerves against the crushing influence of the room and crowd, Maebe kept her spine straight and footsteps steady. At the bottom step before the throne, she dropped into an elegant, well-practiced curtsy. "Raise your head, Miss Sumine," came the gravelly voice above her. "As you wish, my king," she replied, lifting her eyes to meet his. The king was broad, bearded with wiry black fuzz. His hair was the same brown as Morgana's, but his eyes were like wet mud. They lacked the deep honey warmth his daughter had been blessed with. His skin was sun-kissed, as bronze as the brass crown sitting on his creased brow. He was stoic and severe as any human could be, intensified by the stern men who flanked him. "Condolences for the loss of your father. He was a good man, loyal man. He knew his duty. He did it well. You can be proud of his memory. The Sumines have always profited under the allowance to trade in enchanted items from the south. But your father made that undertaking flourish." The king's voice was monotone, as though reciting a script. "Since you were allowed to forsake the previous year of trading, I trust your father believed he taught you enough to take his place. In regards to this, I assume you need no further instruction as to what your role is now." "My father was indeed a great man, and he has done his name proud. I'm sure you are aware that I've been instructed since early childhood in the contracts that we must abide by, and I feel I will be successful in my role as Navok of the Red Seal Fleet, both to fulfill my family's oath to you, our king, and to trade successfully without breaching the laws you so prudently placed on magic." Maebe responded with equal bleakness in her voice. "As a Sumine, you have more duty to attend to than just organizing a merchant fleet. You have been given allowances from your position by my goodwill and faith in your father. Now, you are the last of your line, Miss Sumine." The king's voice scraped along her spine, and blood rushed into her ears. She knew this would have been a topic of discussion eventually, but she wasn't prepared to discuss marriage whilst her father was rotting in a guest room at home. "But as it stands, you have a funeral to arrange, and a long sea voyage ahead of you. We can discuss what you mean to do about providing an heir when you arrive back from the capital. I trust you'll be prepared to leave within the next few days, the king demanded. Maebe paused, pushing aside her argumentative nature to calculate how much time she would need to arrange the funeral. She was filled with a desire to delay sailing so that she could reach out across the Moonay Gulf, and those living in the main that would wish to say farewell to him. Morgana's words rang through her head. She wouldn't class the princess as a friend, but she knew wise advice when she heard it. He just wants you to say yes and be on your way. This isn't something you can argue with. As you command, my king, Maebe spoke to the ground, cursing how weak her voice sounded. Then, when you return, we shall have a more private meeting to discuss how you wish to continue your line, he boomed. Not that I'm that much out of touch with the ladies of the court to think that discussing such a matter wouldn't bother you. He barked a laugh, which made Maebe jump. A few of his attendants chuckled along with him, but none of their smiles reached their eyes. Well, you may leave. I shall see you upon the arrival of the burden. Be sure to have it back in Elpis before summer's end. Maebe offered a quick curtsy, without looking up, and turned on her heel. She was conscious of the boring eyes on her as her feet clipped along the patterned ground. Something significant had happened during that meeting, something she had been excluded from. She had agreed to more than she knew. The Crystal Charter, Daughter of the Red Seal. Chapter 20.